everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Emily, and I'll be one of your co-hosts tonight. And we have a guest co-host tonight. Marlinda is going to be joining us. So Marlinda, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, hi, I'm Marlinda. I'm a conversation designer at Zendesk. Yes, I've worked with Emily in a couple of talks before.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're here. So we have an awesome panel tonight on conversation review and analysis. And I figured we can just do a quick round of introductions. And yeah, Lisa, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is Lisa Falkson. I'm a UX design manager at Amazon. I work on kind of the Alexa core product, manage a team that covers a lot of the core interactions and services, both conversation design and UX design.
Awesome. Tim, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Tim Willers. I'm the head of conversation design at Nibble. Nibble is a chatbot that negotiates with people online. And I write all of the copy that's in the bot and review and analyze our conversations and check they're going smoothly.
Awesome. Nathan?
Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Nathan Bishop. I'm based in the Boston area, and I'm currently a conversation design consultant for Fidelity Investments, where I work on internal-facing conversational experiences.
Awesome. And then let's see if we could get Raymond. Everything good?
Ooh. There we go.
Do you want to do an introduction?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Sorry about that. I'm so sorry about
that. No, you're good.
Okay.
Do you want to do a quick introduction?
Yep. My name is Raymond, and I'm based in the Philippines. And I've been working with the chatbot for 4 years now. And I've been with 2 companies. And yeah, first team was focusing locally. And currently, we are on an international stage. So, yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. So I guess we'll get started with the first question then. You want to go for it, Marlinda?
Yeah, so something we were thinking about, Emily and I were discussing was conversation review in other teams that we always talk about can be different actually in different teams. And we were wondering what terminology you use and what the term means to you. Maybe Nate can start.
Yeah, so conversation analysis, I think it tends to vary a lot based on the team that you're on, and then also the projects that you're working on. So, for example, there could be a new product launch, in which case you're doing as much as you can to sort of plan. So that could include, if you have the luxury, of course, reading conversations to really find out, or discovery, what are users looking for, perhaps implicitly, or with the luxury of conversation, is a lot of times they're explicitly telling you what you want, or what they want. So that's, in one sense, conversation analysis is, serves as a discovery for user needs. It's incredibly powerful for that. And sometimes I argue it's underutilized. And then in other ways, conversation analysis is, in how we often think of it, is really evaluating on a conversation by conversation basis the performance of a bot. So whether it's intent recognition, the quality of flows, or really answering that kind of high level question: did this conversation address a user need? And there can be many strategies for going through that as well. So, but that's generally at a high level how I like to think of conversation analysis.
Awesome. Tim, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I agree completely. And as well as whether the conversation addressed the user needs, it's about how easily did the user get what they want, and did it feel like a human, like natural conversation, or can you spot them having to talk to the bot and almost change their language to, get what you want it to do?
Yeah, for sure. Raymond?
Yeah, I totally agree too. It's basically the same for us, although there are some terminologies with regard to conversation analysis. However, yeah, it's just the same. We look at the chatbot transcripts to gather useful insights from both qualitative and quantitative data, this, which help us make informed decisions and improve the chatbot uh, based on what the data tells us. Like we dive into things like conversation structure. Um, However, I just would like to highlight that it differs on the objectives, on how you would like to use the data. Like, is this like for a daily KPI analysis, or is this for a specific project or goal that you would like to identify a specific study, like why the users are skipping the chatbot and directly connecting to the live agent, something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would add that we have all kinds of metrics, a million metrics, and voice is a little bit different than chat because you have the speech recognition sort of errors and failures and places where people drop out due to just not speaking, timeouts, things like that. But to echo, I think what Nathan said before, it's important to not just look like state by state, so prompt by prompt, but look to the end at the end-to-end interaction, because sometimes it's something earlier in the interaction that confused somebody. They're repeating themselves, trying to clarify, and so looking at end-to-end interaction. So what we try to do is, and again, Amazon data is locked down like you wouldn't believe the tiers of approval just to get to look at totally anonymous transcriptions, much less you can't listen to audio. But looking at that in a sequence and the sampling of conversations as a whole. And we have all kinds of different internal metrics that we look at, but usually that when one state pops out, then you look at the paths that lead to that state and so on.
I actually have a question. If you can't directly look at user feedback or user conversations, what can you do instead to try to do conversation review and analysis?
That's a great question, because sometimes you have to make some judgment calls, based on limited information. So one thing is to look at whether in the design phase, this, like say a certain area is not working, everyone's dropping out at that point. Look at that, whether that was known to be a challenging spot in the design for technical reasons or for in-usability testing or whatever it is. And then potentially look at like in either retesting with different versions in a lab, or launching like a mini A/B test with live data and showing that you can have basically that your data gets better. You're not really looking at the transcriptions per se, but you can look at the overall numbers and see that they improved by doing a rewrite or a change to the flow. So sometimes you have to play around and do some offline work.
Right. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I'll say I personally, in my conversation design career, I've always had access to conversations in whatever capacity, whether PII is screened out. So I would see that as being quite the challenge as someone who loves to review conversations and take advantage of that tight feedback loop. I wouldn't imagine how I would supplement that. So kudos to people who are able to figure that out and make it work.
Yeah, definitely. Marlin, did you want to take another question?
Yeah. I guess for the people in the room, like, what do you think people get wrong about conversation review? Maybe we can start with Raymond.
Yeah, that's a great question. With this one, the usual mistake is actually at the start when we don't have a clear objectives for the conversation review. it can totally affect the study's focus, the sample size, and the improvement recommendations, relevancy. Although analysis can reveal trends, but not paying attention to details like workflow and processes behind it can lead to misunderstanding in the data interpretation. So this is where expertise becomes really important in handling these challenges. With this one, let me share a good example. I had a conversation with you just last week, and actually, the data was showing that more than half, to be specific, 60% were valid escalation. So primarily, these were like um, policy related, wherein this indicates the user's request required escalation for processing. However, upon further checking, I found out that the valid escalations occurred when users selected a particular subtopic within the subject intent, and it leads to a redirection to another intent that's causing the escalation. So the problem was that the architecture doesn't show the performance or the raw performance of the subject intent. So at a glance, the data is actually deceiving. So upon further checking, now the data suggests to split the subject intent and convert that specific subtopic to a main intent that can be triggered independently and isolate its expression data for triggers, and and therefore it can route to a specific intent that actually creates the escalation. So with this, it will help show the raw performance of the subject intent in review.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, I found that too, for sure. It's yeah, you really have to have a good idea of like I think human review is actually really important for that in particular, especially checking on
Data actually deceived me more than one,
Yeah.
multiple times. So you really have to dig in and consider all the technicalities behind it, like the architecture and everything else.
And also what Lisa was saying earlier, the end to end, trying to understand the whole, like where did they mess up in the beginning or the end too. Sometimes people kind of only look at the last intent that was triggered, like, oh, that must have been the only problem. But no, you have to look at the entire conversation.
Yeah, and I've seen funny things like hints that people opt into, like, do you want to hear this extra information? That if you look at the data blindly, it's like, wow, this is a great hint. Everyone wants it. But it's because it was funny and made no sense. So an example was there was a hint around wind chill factor. Like, do you want to hear the wind chill factor? And it was summer in Arizona, and it was like the degrees, it's 110 degrees. Do you want to hear the wind chill factor? And people are like, yes. And you would think like, oh, this is genius. This is working so well. But if you actually listened to the data or thought about it more carefully from the use case and end to end, you would realize that no, people thought it was hilarious. And that's what they're opting in. They didn't actually want wind chill for Arizona in 100-degree heat. That's an anecdote from my good friend Adam.
Wow, that's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that.
So you can't look at data blindly, basically. You have to look at it in context and understand what's really happening.
Yeah. Does anyone else?
Yeah, I would say, particularly when you're reviewing conversations on a conversation by conversation basis and not looking at a big set of data, don't get too bogged down focusing on the negatives, which is so easy to do when you're reviewing conversations and you find yourself looking for problems and ways you can improve and things that don't work so well. But always take a step back to not just find those conversations that work really well and feel like you can see someone having a good experience with your bot, share them with your team, because I find it's such a great way of inspiring people, motivating your team, keeping everyone going, because at the end of the day, this is like the end result of what you put out into the world, and it can feel like sending your child out when you've built a bot and you're sending out. So if you find a great example, share it with your team, because it can also spark other ideas of, oh, this is working really well and we need to go further in this. I think a lot of people find it too easy to get stuck on the negatives. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, Tim, that's a great point. I think that's how you identify patterns that work that you share out with your team. So, I don't know, here's another example. Like, do you want A or B? Is like a classic question that comes up in voice design specifically. People say yes, or they say no, or they, right? Whereas if I say, which one do you want, A or B? That pattern sort of evolved in voice design over years of people observing that phenomenon of people answering in yes or no, or not choosing one of the choices. You can do it in person because you can, with intonation, and if someone says yes, you can say no, 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 which one? You can do that now, obviously better with large language models, but in a very strict sort of bot format, you want to be as clear as possible. And so I think, like you said, you want to share best practices and like wins, and use those to build up patterns for how you write for your bot or your assistant moving forward.
Definitely.
So we do have a question. How frequently do you check transcripts out? And do you use any specific platform, or do you have internal tools to assist you? Does anyone want to take this one?
We have an internal chat, internal platform that we use. In terms of how frequently, I find I love to actually start my day with a 10-minute review of conversations that have come in, just almost a random splattering, and you'd be surprised how often you find genuinely useful and interesting transcripts from that. And then when we launch a new feature or we're testing something else out, that might be like once every couple of weeks, I'll sit down for a longer 1 or 2 hour session. It really depends on the project, but I find frequent small bursts of looking at transcripts incredibly useful.
Yeah, I found that as well. It's yeah, and then you also find other problems that may be happening, or others. You can cover so much from that.
Yeah, I think earlier in the launch process, right, you're going to spot check more. And then over time, when something is kind of proven in production, you can do less frequent checks of reviewing conversations. Yeah.
Raymond?
Yeah, that for me is a different thing. It actually depends on the project and my role, because especially with my previous team, we have rotation of roles to have an equal performance growth. So you won't be stuck on a certain role for a long period of time. So it depends. If I lead like the KPI analysis, I start my day by checking the performance, the what went wrong, what are the decline, what are the ups and downs, and then with that, I start my conversation review. If I lead the traffic monitoring, like onset of the day, like every hour, so that's an hour monitoring performance. I do already conversation review to like a preventive approach for like looking ahead of possible live issues, so we can endorse it to proper department to prevent, to make it like a bigger issue, so something like that. So it totally depends. And if I like created a recommendation or especially a feature request, so what I do is like I perform post-mortem analysis, and I do conversation review to have a comparative data. So if that recommendation was a success or not.
Yeah. Nathan?
I suppose I'll be adding the originality, but yeah, it definitely depends on how often. I do recommend like a set schedule or cadence for reviewing conversations, but even that depends. typically with any sort of like new product launch, whether it's like an adjacent product or you say product in like the conversational sense, I would recommend a little bit more of a weekly review cadence where you have that time set aside, whether it's a Monday morning, Friday afternoon, where you can really dive in and appreciate the full depth of how people are interacting, with not just the bot or the assistant, but in many ways, an important lens to have is that people are also, especially in the customer service or sales context, people are interacting with their brand. And so being able to really dive in and find out what are people saying about you as a company, that is some tremendous insight. And so one other thing is there might be certain events that trigger it. So just like a product launch or a project specific to conversation design might warrant those additional reviews. Something like a public relations issue, or a new trend in customer service, something's broken and a lot of people are chatting in. Those can lead to a lot of learnings, even if retrospective. Okay, if something breaks again, is there something that we can do to anticipate that, or detect it earlier on? So it's definitely a depends, but hopefully that nuance provides answers there. And so sometimes I review weekly, sometimes monthly, sometimes daily, and times will maybe influence my cadence on that, or one-off reviews.
Awesome. Marlinda, do you want to take next question?
Yeah. Just one more comment on that, because I was thinking about how Tim said that he had always had conversation review. I was thinking back to my experience, and actually, some of previous companies didn't have a tool that didn't give you access to transcripts. So everyone was just kind of like, So that's kind of like how we dealt with it at that time. But that was a long time ago. Yeah, my next question I wanted to ask, and I'm sure everyone is anticipating this. Well, first, two parts. I wanted to know, like, how do you deal with nuances such as cultural differences and language complexities, especially in automated processes? And if you are already working in generative AI and LLMs, how does that impact that piece? Maybe Tim can start.
So we're not using generative heavily publicly yet. We're mostly fixed copy in our chatbot. In terms of dealing with cultural or language differences, I mean, we're a negotiation chatbot, so this is something, actually a hurdle that we face a lot, because in some cultures negotiation is very it's expected almost, and in others people shy away from negotiation. So that actually impacts when we review our conversations and we look at what territories we're in. We have to adapt the persona of our chatbot to deal with this. For instance, we had to develop a different persona for an American audience versus a British audience at Nibble, because our casual persona uses British humor or references that just don't land with an American audience. And we realized that quickly, and then just had to develop a slightly different language that would actually resonate with that audience. That's how we approached it there.
How long did it take? Sorry, a quick follow-up. Like, how long did it take you to see that, like, oh, it wasn't landing? Like, when did you guys pick up on it? And then
you know what? It was actually pretty quick. So we had a Shopify app that took off quite quickly. And as we were getting installed on more and more American stores, we noticed when we were reviewing conversations, there were specific lines of copy and messages that in a UK store would really deliver a powerful, positive experience. And in an American store would have someone say, "Oh, that's a bit sarcastic." And so it was just very quick that we noticed that, and then we adapted as we needed.
Right. Yeah. That's a great response time.
But
Right.
that's the benefit of looking at your conversations regularly. Whenever you're going into like a new territory or a new culture, you want to make sure that all of your language actually works. Yeah.
Yes. Very true.
Yeah, I had a similar experience when I was designing for, I'd only worked on US English early, this was, 20 years ago at Nuance. And then I did a sort of a tuning project for an Australian English application. And the phone number recognition was doing terribly. And just like the overall stats, just, accuracy and task completion. And so I went in and listened, and I realized, and this is a completely cultural thing, and I didn't know. And then I asked my Australian friends later, and they said, of course. But when they say phone numbers, they, if there's doubles, they say 88 or 22. And the grammar at the time, because it was a fixed grammar, expected you to say phone numbers digit by digit. And so it wasn't until I looked at the data that I saw all these 88s, 333, whatever. And there's conceptual groupings of how they do it. That's not just random. Rewrote the entire static grammar to accept that, and then reanalyzed it offline, and we went back up to 98% in terms of recognition and task completion. So just the way that people say things, even if it's still English, and then even more so when you go to other languages. I always say, it's not direct translation, it's localization, and make sure you're localizing versus translating.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's things that you think would be common because it seems simple enough, but then you're all surprised.
And like Tim's example, right? Both English.
Yeah.
US English and UK English. My example, US English and Australian English.
Right.
Let me add to this. Aside from offering multilingual support, adding cultural sensitivity into the mix actually helps, like tailoring chatbot content to specific region or cultural preferences. So, like here in our country, we actually have 100 dialects, so 111 to be specific. So, all aside from English and Spanish. So, with that, it's totally impractical to include them all in chatbot. So at first, we only use English. However, after analyzing the data, we realized that it would be beneficial to include a combination of English, Spanish, and Filipino languages in the chatbot responses. So, and this decision was driven by recognition that not all individuals in the country are proficient in English, and we aim to align with the holistic language culture, which involves the blend of these three languages.
Yeah, I would say contextual awareness matters a lot, when considering cultural nuances. Something as simple as knowing where your users are chatting from goes a long way. Like even in the United States, the use of language varies regionally. And so I think it's important to really dive into understanding geographical differences and then dedicating time to being a good listener. Through reading or listening to conversations, you can really appreciate how your users use language differently from yourself before immediately jumping into solutioning. I think the listening or reading part is really key, because sometimes you'll simply need to change how you write prompts or change intents, and then other times you might need to create a totally separate bot, especially in the case of a different language. And there's limitless options in between those two extremes. And so it's incredibly important, just like with any design problem, really listen and try to source as much as you can before immediately jumping to solutioning. And that will hopefully set you up for success.
Yeah, it's all about knowing your users and just making sure they're getting what they need. Yeah. So we have another question. How do you structure capturing the components of a conversation? An initial utterance, spoken or written, is used to extract the high-level intent. Then various slots are filled in the conversation to complete the info required for the task. Is this intent detection slot filling now automated with LLM bot tools, or is it still a call flow to manually build? Does anyone want to take that?
Leave it to Lauren. So Lauren was my first manager at Nuance. He knows the ins and outs of all this stuff very deeply. To ask the toughest question. So short answer, yes. It is automatically. You define kind of what the slots are, but you don't do a and for those who have like played around in voice flow, you can choose one of the LLM models in there. You still have kind of the slots that you want to be filled, but it's not a deterministic flow, as in only goes one direction and you can only fill the slots in a certain order. It can kind of go backwards and around to catch the pieces that you missed. So it is a little bit more flexible. So I'd recommend kind of playing around with some of the prototyping tools to test that. But yeah, in the very deterministic world, you would have a set flow and things have to go in an order, and then you'd have to clearly define if you could go back to that previous state. In LLM world, things are sort of flattened. And it's fluid moving between states, if that makes sense.
Anyone else have anything to add to that?
That hard question.
Yeah. Okay, so I am going to switch tracks a little bit, and I'm going to ask, when you find something that can be improved that requires any changes to the experience, it can sometimes be a little bit hard to get people to listen, or like, especially if you're in a large organization. So do you have any tips, or like have you successfully advocated for changes through insights you've uncovered through conversation review and analysis?
Yes. Often I find that sometimes the larger the organization, the harder it is to influence change, because you have a lot of stakeholders, and this is good too, a lot of excitement for conversational AI. And what I found success with, and it takes a lot of practice for sure, is just leading with positive intent and curiosity. So I think one of the hardest lessons for me as a designer, as I've grown in my career, is that most of the time your original concept for something is not what's going to make production, and in fact it's going to change a lot, and that's a good thing. So, and I say lead with positive intent because it can be easy to present an idea that you've put a lot of work into and feel sort of let down when people disagree with it, but understand that these other teams or people that you work with, they have their objectives that they need to reach. And so lead with that curiosity, really make sure you understand. So, we talk about conversation analysis as important for understanding your users. You need to have that space for also really understanding the teams and the people that you work with. So if you parachute in with that solution and it's my way or the highway, you're not going to have much success with that. But if you assume positive intent of the people that you're working with, take time to understand their needs, and also flex those storytelling muscles, focusing on the benefits and visualizing data and showcasing small wins with those experiments or proof of concepts. I find tremendous success in that. And that's not to say it's not a challenge. It is. Working cross-functionally is a challenge, but it's also rewarding. And, typically the more the challenge it is cross-functionally, the higher the scale that you make an impact. So, everyone's on the same team at the end of the day. And so that mentality gets you incredibly far when it comes to influencing change.
Absolutely. Tim? Oh, Lisa?
Yeah, I
Go ahead.
completely agree with everything Nathan's just said. I think I am in a quite fortunate position at Nibble where we're in a small team where everyone kind of understands the importance of good conversation design. And quite honestly, I've been in that lucky place where I haven't struggled to get stakeholders to listen. But I agree, you've got to approach it with like a positive attitude and show the change that you want to make and how positive that could be. In larger organizations, I'm going to call back to something I remember from Unpassed conference last year. And Nat Walker was a conversation designer at Vodafone. And she gave this great talk about how she got senior people at Vodafone to understand how important conversation design was and making these changes was by asking them to write a conversation and almost testing them. And she got them to do it and then showed them how it should be done. And that exercise was a really kind of powerful way of cementing the value that conversation designers bring. And that really stuck with me. And I think that if I were to ever have that situation, it's something that will be in my head. Yeah.
One quick thing that I'll add is there will be many times as a conversation designer where you are by far, the most fanatic person about conversation design in the room. And so what I challenge you to do is, not everyone's going to be like an evangelist for conversation design, but try to find, especially on those other teams, you'll often find that there's even just one or two people that share a lot of that excitement with you. Tap into that. Set up a one-on-one with them on a bi-weekly cadence and really form that allyship with them, because it can be a lot more helpful when you're not just on the conversation design team presenting a solution, but you also have that person in like call center operations who's excited about it, or someone on the marketing or branding team, because their perspective is valuable too. And odds are along the way, you hopefully understood their needs. And so having some sort of alliance is helpful in reaching solutions. You can probably help them as well. And then long term, hopefully that helps demonstrate the value of conversation design. Sometimes that can be a challenge in organizations, but again, another rewarding one.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic for another panel discussion.
We could go on for hours about it.
Oh, yeah.
I would say though, Nathan, sometimes I'm not the most passionate person in the room because someone has like legal or a VP level leader has gotten very attached to a launch experience, maybe because it was, say, approved by a CEO at one point, and they're less likely to want to change something that was approved at that level. And so they're actually more passionate about keeping the status quo. And I'm maybe very passionate about looking at the results, the conversation and the data and saying, this could be better. And so I did have, one time where a existing experience, I had to pull so much like field research and a ton of A/B testing, actually ABCD testing, just to change one prompt that had been approved at the C-level. So, and it was a no-brainer to me, but I think sometimes once things are in production, people do sort of get, I don't know how else to say it, but attached to like a current experience. And they reason through all the original reasons that it was worded or done that way and approved, at the highest level that way. And it's hard to combat that, right? Especially if you weren't there. So to come in and then say, oh, we need to change something, you have to really prove yourself. So that was a big learning.
Is that where you need to go like armed with data
Exactly.
Mm.
And especially at some place like Amazon, which is very data driven and customer, our first leadership principle is customer obsessed. So if you show anecdotes and you show, and then you show hard data, both qualitative and quantitative data, to prove your point, that's going to be your best bet to sort of influence leadership and make change.
Do you also try to tie those changes to like business goals?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So, we have the concept of engagement, right? The more people succeed, then the higher engagement, and then the more successful, then they use this feature more. In the case of a bot, they go to customer agents less, and they go to automation more. So yeah, if you can tie it back to any sort of either money savings or money generation, then yes, you're
right. Yeah. Yeah. Raymond, do you have any thoughts
Yeah.
on this?
With my previous team, we were a regional office because this company was like worldwide, supporting um, catering customers worldwide, and we have this regional team. So the usual challenges that we have, especially when we request like projects or recommendations or feature requests to be specific, um, it always like the delay, because aside when we launch the project or the initiative, it gets to the local product team for approval, and then it goes to the regional team. Now, if the regional team has too many on their plates, it gets to their uh, it totally gets delayed, and that's the hardest part of this. And the regional team is actually in Singapore, so it's in another country. It's pretty hard to collaborate, although we have the technology of um, remote meetings. However, it's totally challenging, especially getting the data. At first, we didn't have access to the data. I had to request the data for them for conversation review, and then that's another delay. And then when I end up with a recommendation, that's another delay. So that's the hard part with a large company.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that sounds complicated. A lot of hoops to jump through for that. Marlinda, do you want to take the next question?
Sure. I was just thinking about right now as we're talking about tying the chatbot success to like business goals. Like how do you measure the success and effectiveness of conversation review and analysis efforts, like KPIs? And I'm curious, has there ever been a KPI that you had that maybe someone above you was like, we don't care about that number, we want this? Anyone want to start?
Oh, one thing I think about when it comes to conversation analysis is, for me at least, success looks like walking away learning something. So, and I'll explain that. It's something I try to do regularly on whatever cadence is necessary at the time. And I try to just go in with an open mind as much as I can. Sometimes you'll have an agenda, as it's tied to a project. But for me, success is when I go in with an open mind and I'm, sampling conversations or any maybe stuff to sample or supplement that. Whether it's social media analysis, if I have access to that, maybe what are people saying about the bot on something like Twitter or Reddit, for example. Do I have access to call sampling? Especially in a customer service context. And then just did I walk away learning something new about a user challenge, or maybe even a challenge faced by someone in the call center? So especially as that relates to user empathy, to me, that's time well spent and that's success for me. And the general conversation about KPIs, there's a lot that you could probably talk about. Many metrics that you could glean from, a conversational interface. Mine that I love, and there's definitely hot takes around it, but I think if calculated with intention, NPS is a tremendously valuable score. not so much in that, how would you rate this interaction, since I wouldn't quite say that's valuable NPS, just the 5-star rating, but really digging into, is there a way you can calculate, would someone recommend this interaction or working with our company in general? Would someone recommend this to a peer? And not so much like, there's that funny meme where someone is like doing a user survey for Windows, and it's like, would you recommend Windows 7 to a friend? And they go, I don't have conversations recommending it. Like, that is funny. And I say, like, it doesn't so much mean that people are having conversations about it, but if you surprised and delighted someone enough that if it came up, if someone recommends that, that is like a tremendous user experience, whether it's in customer service or in, engaging with a voice bot or a mobile app. So if calculated with that context, I think NPS is incredibly valuable. Some parts of the business might be, and I bring up customer service because that's typically what I work with, or sometimes sales. Containment might be an important metric, or maybe a conversion rate. So at that point, I say conversation analysis is important to complement those metrics on the spreadsheet, so to speak, but really focus on what are those output metrics that maybe some people in the business really care about, whether it's NPS or containment, or average handling time. But also, more so as a designer for your own success, focus on those input metrics that lead to those bigger results for the business. So NLP accuracy or error rate, knowledge utilization rate, or channel shift rate. There's many that go into, what are the inputs that make a bot better, whether it's strengthening the NLP or the knowledge offerings or the convenience of it. Find a way to measure those inputs that ultimately bring that business success. So there's metrics that are going to matter to you, the team of the designers, and then also the needs of the business. So getting in touch with all those and complementing those with conversation analysis will hopefully be able to illustrate the full success of a bot.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty thorough. And yeah, that's a good point about like surveys. And what was the example that you gave? I kind of forgot already, but I was thinking something else in my brain. I had something similar. Does anyone have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I would say sometimes we look at sort of friction as, there's as a metric. So like, how hard is it for someone to get to their end goal? How can you streamline it? So number of turns, right? So because people lose patience if they have to keep going through a long and protracted process to get what they want. So reducing friction, but then there's the concept of like positive friction. So for example, you always want to have a confirmation before a purchase, right? Or before a profile change or something, or a message is sent, right? Because that's, might have security implications. So we look at friction in different ways, as far as like number of turns, reducing number of turns, but maintaining positive friction.
And even aside from how many turns you take, look at how long people are willing to spend with your bot, which doesn't necessarily correlate, but we're always looking at how long we have in Nibble to actually get someone to a deal, for instance, and how quickly we need to satisfy what they want. And we actually find it's like less than a minute, really, that we want to kind of aim for in terms of resolving a deal.
Well, to add to this, if the enhancement from the conversation review bring a positive change to a particular chatbot KPI, it's already a win. However, for me, I actually focus more on CSAT or survey because you're getting raw data on how the work is making the customer or the users a happy camper or not. So it's with that, you can leverage your work or your conversation review into another, like a sub review for adjustments or for further improvement. Because sometimes looking at the resolution rate, it doesn't actually give you the true resolution rate, because there are bots or there are workflows that, yeah, it's 100% resolution rate. However, it only shows that the user completed the work, the chatbot workflow, but it didn't actually resolve their concern. So it actually depends, but the most genuine data that you can get are the customer's feedback.
So a follow-up question then, I'm curious, sometimes there are chatbots that may deliver an article and the bot might say, was this article helpful and this conversation helpful? And they kind of attribute, let's say the article wasn't the greatest and they attribute that bad experience to the chatbot. Like, do you have any experience around trying to differentiate, like actually this was not the chatbot itself, there's another team handling writing the articles and the content?
So that's a great question. Well, since chatbot or specific chatbots rely on article as a solution, that's also an impact to the overall chatbot performance or solution. So we really have to. It's part of our job as a conversation review to coordinate with other teams like the help center team to to provide a relevant solution to the user to totally address the concern.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, I think we'll go through one or two questions. So I guess we have one other question. What are your thoughts on using generative AI to automate your review and analysis?
I'm so curious if anyone on this panel is using generative AI to review and analyze, because I'm not, but I'm just intrigued.
I would say in general, using tools to analyze conversations, whatever context, or not so much, whatever capacity, it should be just that, a tool and not a replacement for conversation analysis. And definitely disagree with me, but I pretty much exclusively see the only people that are advocating for fully replacing conversation analysis with tools are typically the salespeople for those tools. Now, I'm a little biased, but conversation analysis is honestly one of my most favorite parts of this job. Being obsessed with the challenges that users face, and as someone who loves to learn, like there's nothing like reading conversations. And so tools can help, but don't let it replace the art of conversation analysis, because conversation analysis isn't so much a technical problem, it's a learning opportunity. And so you can't really solve a learning opportunity with just buying a tool.
Yeah, I find that a lot of conversation review can actually be quite qualitative, and you want that human in the loop to look at how human the conversation feels, and you need to see it with an emotional lens that GPT can struggle with. I think you must get to a point where you do need to use tools like this to scale. But I'd be especially skeptical of if you're using generative AI in your chatbot and you're using Gen AI to review and analyze. It's basically marking its own homework. And how will you then kind of branch out more? I would be skeptical. And yeah, I think there's that qualitative aspect that you don't want to lose ever.
Yeah, I would say there's no substitute for real data. And also to point out that, that's what these generative AI things are trained on, is actual data, right? So it's sort of going in a circle a little bit there, but I would lean towards your customer data as well. So trying to generate something off a generic system to handle very more specific customer base and use cases, I think might be right, because unless you do like an amazing job prompt engineering, creating and generating that, you're not necessarily going to nail like who that customer is and how they would actually make their request.
Well, I want to add the role of critical and analytical thinker is totally necessary for the conversation review analysis. As sometimes, or most of the time, the automated systems might miss out on important bits of information, which could mean they don't get the full picture when analyzing the conversation or the context. So this can result in overlooking of important trends or patterns. And this circle backs to my example earlier where data was pretty deceiving.
Yeah, I think it adds another layer of complexity that just creates kind of double the work. And you just need even more review.
Exactly. And like what Lisa just said, it's like the LLMs use data. So you need to, in order to successfully use that for conversation review, you have to actually feed it with new data, which you could have
Right.
just looked at that in your own with your human review and then fixed it instead of trying to feed the LLM first and then using that to fix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll finish off with one more question. I guess just really quickly. How do you look for gaps in your conversation design or inspiration for new intents? Do you solely focus your review on utterances that hit the fallback? Or are there any other places you focus your efforts?
I think if I solely focused on utterances that hit fallback, I would miss a lot of opportunities to improve our bot. And with us, we have a chattiness filter in Nibble, and we can filter by how verbose someone is when they're talking to our bot. And a filter like that really helps pick up those conversations that test or push our bot slightly past its normal paces. And it's a great way of finding the new things we need to be able to respond to and improvements we can make. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I would say in general, I've been loving lately, I'm still learning about it, but I've been loving learning about and uncovering concepts of informal design interventions. So basically when users need to make unofficial modifications to designs for, those designs to work for them. So the example that I use a lot, and I stole it from Twitter, so I didn't come up with it myself, but when you go into like those family-owned establishments, or it could be a chain too, but they have those like minimalist, like Square or Clover or Toast terminals, and sometimes there's a gap in the functionality versus form, and you'll find like that piece of like ripped legal pad paper with like the written instructions on it, insert card and wait 5 seconds before removing or what have you, and those are those modifications that the user have to make for the design to work. And so in general, and perhaps a little bit more in a multimodal context, but I like to observe conversations and find those examples of that. In what ways are users engaging with our interfaces, and in whatever way, how are they improvising or sort of making those modifications? Do they have to use certain words, or are they simply joining and just asking for a human? Like that's kind of a modification, if you will. And uncovering the why behind that, that's been a big insight that I've been obsessed with finding. And you won't quite find that, just looking in an incredibly micro scale, whether it's, the fallback utterances or, maybe successful conversations or, those one word utterances and entities. You really have to get the full picture. And yes, it's sometimes time consuming. There's no shortcut for it.
Yeah. Any other last thoughts?
Well, to add to that, like maximizing your resources, not just solely on um, analyzing the chatbot data. I came to the point like I had to analyze the live agent data. Okay, so like when I was working with CSAT, so I need to understand why for this specific chatbot intent, although the chatbot was providing the accurate information to the user, however, we're not getting the CSAT. We're just getting the resolution rate. But when they're connected to the live agent, same information, but they're getting the CSAT. So upon checking, so it's on the positive scripting that they're using. So we actually capture those, canned responses and utilize those to bot, and actually got a gain.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I guess we're at time, so I guess we'll end here. But thank you all for joining, and
Thank
this
you
was
for
really
inviting
fun.
us.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.
This has been phenomenal. Thank you for organizing this and having us. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me too.
Yeah, hope
Yeah.
to see you in the future panel. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.